Hey guys and gals, Neighbor here from Drake Queen Gaming, and some of you on Twitter, the Gaming Drag. Today I'm coming back at you another Let's Play episode of No More Future. Let's go ahead and jump right back into it, shall we, y'all? Alarm chain, you are up, and let's go. Dear Lord, let's not talk about B grades. I still have nightmares from the one Mary hooked up to me earlier this week. Hooked you up with? Oh, where do I even begin? You take your time explaining what happened with your first assistant to the dragon. As emotive as you'd like to be while recounting this subject matter, you try your best to stay calm and focused so as to not upset the serious-looking man before you. And that lasted about 3 days before I finally had enough. The very reason I returned their new relay 2 days ago was so I could get Mary to remove him. I will never understand what in the world goes through that woman's head. Yeah, same here. The way I see it, B-grades are nothing more than toys for the wealthy and the eccentric. A fun conversation topic to either entertain, and I use that term very loosely here, or bore your guests to death with. I wouldn't survive with one in my head for an hour, much less 3 days. For that matter, neither would any sane person out there. It is a miracle you resisted that long, yes. Maybe Mary was trying to figure out whether I was similar to a human in that regard. A rather generous way of interpreting her actions, wouldn't you say? If your mind, if we can call it that, is anything remotely comparable to a human, she should already have the tools to ascertain that on her own. I don't know if it's really that simple. The Drake quietly scoffs at your uncertainty, but does not attempt to continue the conversation further. You're not sure whether he's truly trying to keep faith to his earlier promise, or if he simply doesn't have anything else left to say. And not wanting to spend the rest of your trip to the restaurant in silence, you try to go back to an earlier discussion. So, you still haven't explained to me why you want to shut down Mary's project and all. Jasper raises an eyebrow at your seemingly needless query. I believe I provided ample motivations earlier. You can only think back 5 minutes ago, or further back to our meeting if you need more. Yeah, I've gathered a lot from all that already. But you still haven't told me why you refuse to acknowledge the synthetic's humanity, or what caused you to develop these views in the first place. You would word it like that, wouldn't you? Now it's your turn not knowing how to reply. Excuse me? Refuse to acknowledge. You're acting as though your humanity is already established as a matter of fact, when it's clearly anything but. It's a subtle way of trying to paint me as some sort of monster for refusing to acknowledge what you believe to be an indisputable truth. It might work on the ignorant or the easily emotional, but I won't fall for tricks like these. While you want to feel offended at Jasper's remark, the truth is that you can see where he's coming from. Without even realizing it, you forced your beliefs onto him and held him to the same standards as Mary or Natalie, when you more than anyone should know that things are nowhere as simple as that. Is this what you've been doing with your friends too? With Daphne, Apollo, Nem, with George? You hope not, yet the shadows storming your thoughts whisper otherwise. I'm sorry about that. I didn't think my words through much as I didn't think my words through as much as I should have. I'll try to avoid doing that again in the future. As painful as it sounds, you'll need to genuinely consider Jasper's perspective and try to understand his motivations if you really want him to understand yours. Now that you think about it, since when has this been your goal? Last you checked, your only desire was to flee from this arrangement as soon as you got the chance. Either way, you're not entirely opposed to growing a little closer to Jasper if it means getting targeted by him a little less often. It might even help Mary avoid some heat in the future, hypothetically speaking. And you don't need to explain why that'd be beneficial to you as well. Angry dragon. It might even help Mary. Okay, alright. I suppose it's pointless to get angry with you either way, all things considered. In the end, you're nothing but an automaton, and I can't fault you for the way you were engineered. Jasper just decides to bring you back to reality with one of his casual, charming remarks. Well, that's not very nice either, is it? You said earlier you were going to treat me as your equal for a while, didn't you? What happened to that promise? The Drake remained silent before your inquiry, evidently quite aware of his faults. It takes a while for the viridescent reptile to form an opinion, but in the end he can do nothing but agree with your stance, as much as it pains him to do so. Fair enough. Regardless, I don't understand why you'd even need to think, given your condition. Robot, android, or whatever, you are still one of the most powerful computers humanity ever created. I cannot fathom a reason why you need to even think things through, with so much information practically at your fingertips. It's not as easy as that. Sure, I can look stuff up online whenever I want stuff, but that doesn't mean I know everything. But you could. Now it's your turn to lay speechless in your seat, unsure of what to say. Why do you hesitate? Why remain ignorant when you can be anything but? I don't know. I'd say it's probably because I just don't feel like it, but I'm not sure you'd like that answer a whole lot. I guess I just prefer learning about stuff on my own instead of reading everything up online. It feels more personal to be that way. I'd also argue that conversing with others and living in general would be a lot more monotonous if you had no more room to learn or grow. The Drake still shivers upon hearing you speak of thinking, learning, and living, but he keeps faith to his promise and refrains from commenting on your speech otherwise. At least in a way you're used to. With logic like that, no wonder Dr. Shelley seems to leave you in the dark just as much as she does me. That came out of nowhere. It really didn't. What you said simply got me thinking of our previous conversations in a new light is all. Back when I first met you, I thought you being oblivious to the way the law worked on synthetics was a ruse, and I had similar feelings during our discussion post-Bradbury in your apartment. The thought of you genuinely being this dumb never even crossed my mind. I always assumed Mary kept you up to speed with everything she did. Which could very well still be the case, but this could all be just an attempt on your behalf to convince me otherwise. Good God, how does Mary even stand this guy? Now you almost feel bad over trying to tell Mary not to be unreasonable with her superior. This reptile clearly deserves every inch of her distaste. His casual rudeness aside, he does raise an interesting if slightly painful point. I'm telling the truth. Whether you believe me or not is another matter entirely. Mary explained her reasoning as not wanting to concern me with things she's supposed to take care of, but yeah, who are we kidding? She does have a habit of keeping people in the dark about stuff, even me. Jasper raises an eyebrow upon seeing you so confused and hesitant, as though he never expected you to ever feel that way toward the cat lady. And yet you said you trust her nonetheless. I can see why you'd be suspicious of that, yeah. But what's the alternative? Confiding in the owners who made it clear that they see me as nothing more than an AI? And all the people out there who currently think all the same things? Confide in you? The CEO responds with nothing but silence. His thoughts entirely indiscernible thanks to that ever-serious look in his eyes. As flawed as Mary is, she gave me hope when I had none. A life, when my old one threatened to slip away. Second, now, water time. Alright, guys and gals, we are back. Okay. She's one of the few people I have left that has been consistently kind and attentive towards me, and always cares about my well-being above all else. Can you blame me for wanting to accept her as a friend nonetheless, in spite of all her shortcomings? Once more, the dragon appears unsure of how to reply. However, that look in his eyes is much different from the one he had before. You're not quite sure how, but it is. He seems to be mulling something in his mind, and you have no clue whatsoever as to what it could be. Whatever this change you've noticed in him might be, at the very least he appears far more open to dialogue than he did before. The owners. What? You've never met them before today, did you? What did you gather about them in the short time we've spent together? You're a little taken aback by his sudden, inexplicable question. Not only is it entirely out of left field, it's also quite difficult to answer. Your worst fear is that this is some sort of test, and that the wrong reply might spell doom for your immediate future. Am I allowed to be frank? Of course. That's the whole point of why we're here, is it not? Even about your grandfather? The dragon hesitates before your request for clarification, a myriad of emotions passing through his gaze. I would suggest you choose your words a little more carefully when speaking of him, perhaps. But other than that, yes, you are allowed to speak your mind. That's quite surprising. You didn't think you'd ever be given permission to be honest around someone so unapproachable. Still, you still have doubts as to whether he's going to keep his word or not, but you decide to speak on this matter nonetheless, if only for the sake of continuing the conversation. Well, they all just seem kind of out there for starters. Eccentric would be a good word for it, but in general, they just gave me really weird vibes. The Drake's eyes roll towards the ceiling, though not necessarily out of annoyance towards you. Upper-class people tend to have that sort of impact, yes. The pangolin and rabbit also came across as very self-centered too, I suppose. They seemed really bothered by the fact that you called them for a meeting and disrupted their plans, even though you were just trying to look out after their company. Again, Jasper raises an eyebrow at your comments. I'm surprised you could speak so politely of my actions today, given the purpose I'd call that meeting for. Yeah, you're not the only one, believe me. I'm still not sure why you want the things you do, but I can't say I really blame you. I haven't exactly been a model synthetic in the past few days. At the end of the day, you're still a businessman looking for after his own company. It could be that I'm being a bit too generous right now, but I get where you're coming from if that's the case. The sudden silence in the car communicates to you that the dragon is once again thinking things through in his head, seemingly detached from reality. What could possibly have someone who speaks his mind so freely all the time so deeply lost in thought? Finally noticing that the conversation hasn't moved on since you last spoke, Jasper decides to briefly interrupt his mullings. You may continue if you wish. Right. Well, I can't say much else of those two I talked about earlier. The things they said and the manner in which they did came off as maybe a little selfish. Like, they cared more about themselves than they did Pandora. But overall, they didn't stray too far from what I thought a stereotypical capitalist would look and sound like. Not like you have much experience with that sort of individual, aside from a few video shows and occasional reading material for class. What about my grandfather? And here's where your hair would stand up all at once, if your new body had any of it. Jasper's been true to his word so far, but the idea of speaking of his own family before him still has you more than a little on edge. You decide to play it safe, at least for now. Well, he was pretty scary, that's for sure. I don't think I've been this close to staring death in the face since my last days at the hospital. So you know. I'm not sure what to make of him besides that, though. He didn't seem all that interested in the conversation until you mentioned that fight. Even then, all he sought was to erase all evidence of what happened. I still can't figure out why. And for that matter, neither can you tell why Jasper asked you about this to begin with. Why did he ask about your opinions on the owners when he was so adverse on hearing your opinions on anything only 10 minutes earlier? I see. So he says, and nothing more. Feeling a little annoyed, you decide to ask about that. Was my answer satisfying? Was it what you were hoping to hear? No, I wasn't hoping to hear anything. That's what he chooses to reply with. Yet that look in his eyes says something else entirely. You're still unsure of what's going on with him, but at least you feel as though you're moving the conversation along somehow. I assume Mary never told you the way Pandora's shares are divided amongst the owners either, correct? You're once again surprised to hear Jasper try to involve you in the conversation so willingly. It's a little tough to get used to after he spent so long trying to shut you down, especially when you still have no idea why he's talking about this stuff to begin with. Why would she even tell me something like that? It's not particularly relevant, I agree, but it is rather insightful. That you can agree with. You still know so little about the corporation he works for, even though you owe them practically everything. Mary never spoke about them much. Arthur was unreliable from start to finish, and Natalie, well, the topic just never happened to come up so far. As it stands, you're not going to say no to free information, no matter how insignificant, especially when it comes from the very person in charge of the whole thing. As it currently stands, my grandfather owns 63% of Pandora Incorporated. Miss Lightning owns 24%. Mr. Aljan, 13%. I see. But wait, what was the whole point of inviting the latter two then? If your grandfather owns the vast majority of the company, doesn't that mean that he's the only one in charge? It does. Now you're confused. Well, more confused than usual at least. Luckily, Jasper is quick to step in to provide elucidations. Pandora was founded by what can best be described as a cabal of wealthy business owners and so-called philanthropists. Originally, there were a plethora of small-time shareholders over a vast capital that they squabbled over incessantly. One man, however, realized rather quickly that this was an inefficient way to govern our own growing empire. Are you talking about your grandfather? That would be the logical assumption, especially considering he's the one running the whole show as per the CEO's words. Still, a cabal of wealthy business owners and philanthropists, you're not sure why, but you never expected Jasper to use this sort of language when talking about his own company's founders. Mainly because it feels belittling somehow. The grandfather is not that old, thank you very much. But you are correct in deducing that it was a member of my family, though a distant relative he may be. As time went on, this ancestor began buying out his fellow partners one by one. In return for his leadership, he promised to send money to their families as compensation for the rest of time. And if to secure them a spot as part of the wealthiest elite for the rest of eternity, with none of the effort or knowledge required to actually earn such a spot. For many, it was an easy choice, even if they wound up regretting it much later on when it became clear that our revenues far outclassed what little they earned as a result of this deal. So they bought everyone out, and they got practically endless wealth as a result, and it was still nothing compared to what Pandora makes? You're not sure whether to feel pity or jealousy for these people. Either way, the ancestors of Mr. Aljan and Miss Lightning were different. They were bumbling idiots, same as the rest of them, but they were stubborn, and that ended up being their saving grace. They held on to their stocks for dear life, and their descendants still do to this day. The lucky, miserable buffoons. For all intents and purposes, those cretins are nothing but glorified parasites, leeching off of the fortunes we generate like glittering gold-covered pests. And furthermore, they insist on playing a minor role as part of Pandora's establishment, correct? It's actually frightening how easy it is to indulge in the dragon's venomous rhetoric when it's not aimed at you. You cannot but listen to every word he speaks as he dances with language, carrying with him the fury and grace of a true master. You almost feel ashamed of yourself. Almost. That's the infuriating part. There's nothing more annoying than a leech who styles themselves a manager. But nonetheless, they are my bosses, and I am committed to working under them in spite of all this. At least my grandfather's there to ensure they could do this company no harm. Alright, I'm going to pause it right there. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and check out our Patreon if you can. It always helps. Before I go, I'm going to give a quick shout out to our lovely bronze tier patrons. Thank you all for all you do for the channel. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you to our silver tier patron, Cade Silverman. Thank you, Go But Above Beyond. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you to our gold tier patron, Trezum Guy. You're awesome. We love you. Thank you for subbing to Ultimate Tier. Anyway, if y'all want to get your names in the credits, get access to all of our Not Safe for Work contents as little as $5. Alrighty, I love you all. I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye-bye!